still not updated, and still we are using the old operation theatre layouts and techniques. So this is my experience. I will be talking to you on my experience as a healthcare accreditor during it looks like a maze and it's quite difficult to circumnavigate this maze. And why do we need this quality norms for sterilization? Because it depends on men and machines and both capable of error. So we need quality norms to reduce this error and enhance the safety. So what is wrong with our sterilization practices? Disinfectants used indiscriminately, used unnecessarily, not used when needed, and the concentration, if at all we use, is not adequate. And due to economic consideration, we do restrict the usage in certain areas. And whatever we read in the journals and textbooks, the laboratory testing and what we practice, the hospital condition may not correlate at all. There's a huge economic loss on unnecessary usage of chemical disinfectants, and we tend to concentrate a lot on flows and inanimate objects. And if the resources are not spent with scientific understanding, all this cost or variable expenses will go should. So the reduction of microbial count is very important. We are not going to sterilize the entire theatre. We need to take practical things into consideration. What we are going to do is disinfect the theatre and reduce the microbial count. And microbes rarely reach the operation site, particularly in our setup, in our kind of surgery, rarely reaches the operation site. So paying great attention to the floors is unnecessary. And what is more important is keeping the floor clean and dry, which itself will reduce the bacteria. Daily cleaning is mandatory, so the floors are swept thoroughly, walls and doors mopped with whatever disinfectant mandated. So frequent cleaning of walls and roof of theatre is not needed because that has little effect, and don't disturb these areas unnecessarily. And floors rarely get, even though it gets contaminated, it depends on the number of persons present in the OT, which is in our hand. So the care of floors, remember only 1% of microbes present on the floors are pathogenic. So on many occasions, the staph aureus is isolated as a prominent pathogen, which has no role in disinfection, the routine disinfection. So cleaning the floor reduces the flora by 80%, and addition of disinfectant reduces to 95%. So what we do helps only for those 15%, and busy hospitals counts rise in 2 hours. Particularly in our camp setups, the count can rise even before you start the first case. So do not disturb the roof unnecessarily, and don't use ceiling fans because they cause aerosol spread. Clean only when remodeling or accumulated good amount of dust is visible. So basically the decontamination, cleaning the floors, surfaces and sinks, and also the drains. Very, very important that drains are taken care of, and you need to disinfect the prism and lenses, and in case you suspect any of the rare forms of infection, then disinfection is mandatory, and sterilization, of course, surgical equipments and needles are to be taken care of. This is a common thing we use for the metal surfaces and trolleys, so there are new disinfectants available, and for the instruments, steam under pressure is the best, dependable, non-toxic, inexpensive way of sterilization, and that is the regular autoclave with the standard parameters of 120 degrees centigrade for 20 minutes under the required pressure. So these are some other ways of cleaning the equipments: 4-bore cleaning technique, ultrasonic cleaning, and flushing the camera is very important in our theatres. And so we go to the basic thing what we have discussed in many forums. Do we need to fumigate our operation theatres? The theatre layout discussed by Dr. Kalpana and the modern layouts do not need fumigation. It's a waste of energy and resources, but we still see in many ophthalmic theatres they use fumigation. So we'll be discussing more on that. So this is the comment given by one of the accreditators, a world-class accreditator, seeing our operation theatres. Our surgical equipments are world-class, but our protocols are third-class. So the heating, ventilation, air conditioning system, they really help, particularly in a modern theatre. Maintain indoor air temperature, maintain humidity, control the odors, remove the contaminated air, and also reduce the risk of airborne microorganisms, and it makes maintenance easier. In a modern operation theatre, cost control is very effective. Even though the initial cost is very high, maintenance cost is very low in the modular theatres. So the ideal OT HVAC norms, the temperature ideally should be maintained between 20 to 20 degrees centigrade, and it's comfortable for human beings, inhibits bacterial growth, and the humidity should be maintained to 30 to 60% to slow down the bacterial growth. Laminar airflow ideal, UV radiation can be used as additional measure in theatres which do not have laminar airflow. There are certain issues with our theatres, OTs with fans, windows, window air conditioning, multiple tables, and sterilization within the OT. So more than 80% of OTs do not have air handling units, hence I'll be discussing more on this fumigation technique. Without HVAC, fumigation would be necessary. So this is the fogging technique introduced by Lister in 19th century. So what we use basically here is the fumigator or the fogger. We use a disinfectant to decontaminate rooms. So it was actually started in ICUs during the World War time, and it was being used in many theatres even now. So later formalin was used, and with formalin declared as a carcinogenic, many theatres now use carboxyl acid and some other chemicals like silver hydrogen peroxide, and there are new chemicals which is used, aldazone, krypton on incident. They are supposed to be good cost-benefit ratio, and the materials are good, excellent cleaning properties, which all these new aldehyde materials, and virtually no sticky residue in the theatre. So what actually fogging system does it makes the droplets thrust by a motor running at 20,000 RPM to a distance of 15 meters. So if your theatre is within this area, each nook and corner will be reached by these droplets. There are some people who use EcoShield and hydrogen peroxide diluted with silver nitrate. And there are certain unresolved issues with this type of fumigation because of the lack of standards, the lack of standard protocols for testing the effectivity of fumigation, and the sensitivity of sample used. And no studies in the Indian context to demonstrate that fogging actually reduced the incidence of nosocomial infections, and no control studies which reflects the beneficial effects of fogging. But in India, studies have not compared standard cleaning with fumigation, but we have found that there is no substitute for vigorous scrubbing, washing of surfaces, and removing the organic matter. And safety of repeated exposure to disinfectants, particularly the equipment, our microscopes, the instruments, and people have to be considered. And but there are some points to support in the Indian scenario. Significant reduction in the number of bacteria in the ambient air because we don't have a good air control mechanism. Effective decontamination of exposed environmental surfaces, and decreased risk of infection for housekeeping personnel engaged in the terminal cleaning. And also the housekeeping costs with fumigation are less, and psychological benefits for the hospital personnel, particularly the operating surgeon. So the importance of hand washing could not be re-emphasized better, right from period of William Moster. Soap, water, and common sense yet the best antiseptic. Good hand washing practices save many lives. If this is practiced along with the universal precautions of hand washing, barrier protection, safe technique, safe handling of showers, safe handling of specimens and spills, and good waste disposal mechanism and usage of disposables, many of the protocols can be standardized according to universal standards. So these are validation of sterilization system in the OT. I'm sure the next speaker will be covering more on this. The temperature and humidity has to be checked and monitored. The air particulate count has to be checked. The air change rate in a modular theatre has to be calculated with reference to your work as well as the number of surgeries you do. The pressure differential levels of the OT and validation of HEPA filters is mandatory every 6 months or 1 year according to your usage. These are some of the registers which really helps you in the medical legal issues for traceability as well as cluster infection cases. The OT logbook, the OT surveillance plan, autoclave logbook, flash autoclave logbook if you are using one, and ETO register, etc. for tracking and recall of your instruments. These are some of the protocols to be established in the regular maintenance of sterilization. The protocols for fumigation, for autoclaving, the regular OT surveillance, and if you have a window unit or a split unit, you need protocol for AC maintenance. And of course, all this has to be documented for effective validation as well as for accreditation and certification. These are some of the monitoring procedures you definitely need. Monitoring of cleaning is mandatory, particularly it is relegated to the housekeeping people and the lower cadre staff. You need to monitor your sterilization areas, you need to monitor their procedures, and of course see to that the standards are kept in good control. So what is important? Prevention of infections, men, machine, or the materials. Apart from overseeing all these things, as a surgeon, we all possess with good eye-hand coordination, extensive medical knowledge and expertise in anatomy. But as a surgeon, you also need to possess this non-technical skill set, situation awareness. You need to be the decision maker of the data, mechanisms and protocols. You have to communicate with your team and offer leadership position. And all said and done, the present system in many of the theatres like this, there's a clear disconnect between the operating surgeon and the OT staff. Unfortunately, we have to take care of all those issues because no such buttons for us, no heart control delete in our life as a surgeon. So we need to take into consideration the regular protocols and see to that all these are established well and maintained well and monitored well in our day-to-day practice. Thank you, Dr. Srinivas, for the opportunity. Yes, sir.
After the best time to fumigate at the end of the 30